Have you ever looked at a light bulb and thought, boy, I wish someone had invented this 2,000 years ago? Well, we might have missed humanity's biggest head start. In 1936, archaeologists in Iraq uncovered a collection of clay pots buried near the ancient city of Baghdad. And inside some of these pots were copper tubes and iron rods. Now, there are a lot of ways to store fruit preserves, but archaeologists think that this is evidence of the world's first battery. Let's dive in. The discovery was made by a team led by German archaeologist Wilhelm King, who was excavating the site of a Parthian and Sassini noble's house just outside of modern-day Baghdad. The settlement dates back to the Parthian Empire in Mesopotamia around 200 BCE and was likely abandoned around 300 CE when the empire fell to the south. King found several rooms filled with broken pottery and other artifacts, but he was most interested in 3 intact clay jars from one room. Inside one of the jars, which measured about 20 centimeters high and 13 centimeters wide, was a rolled-up piece of copper, about 18 centimeters long. Another jar contained 2 pieces of copper, along with a ceramic crucible, while the third jar had a single iron rod inside. The copper is key because it's highly conductive. In fact, it's still used for electrical wiring today. Meanwhile, iron is highly magnetic, so if the copper were hooked up to the iron in the right way, it would complete a circuit. Now, there isn't much conductivity between iron and ceramics, but if you fill the jar with the right kind of liquid, it could become conductive enough to make something interesting happen. So let's fill one of these jars with vinegar, since vinegar is acidic and has a lot of free electrons. What happens if we take our copper and iron rods and touch them both to the vinegar? Nothing yet. If we dip them in more fully though, we see a few tiny sparks fly between the rods. This is the very basic principle of how a battery works. When you complete a circuit by putting 2 dissimilar metals in an acidic liquid, the more active metal transfers electrons to the less active metal. Those electrons build up over time and generate a voltage difference between the 2 metals, which means they want to flow. Once connected, they do so and create a current. Of course, this setup won't power your cell phone, but depending on the concentration of the acid and the surface area of the metals, you can create a small voltage, maybe enough to power a small lamp or electroplates, some jewelry or metals. In 1978, researchers tried recreating these experiments with various liquids and got results similar to the vinegar experiment, even more. They took it a step further and dipped various objects into the jars to test their conductivity. They plated coins, including one that had the profile of King Augustus, who ruled Rome from 27 BCE to 14 CE. The process of electroplating also creates a visible reaction, which may be why there are traces of silver on some of the coins found at the archaeological site. Archaeologists found a total of 25 jars with these kinds of materials, although only 13 of them contain both copper and iron. But not everyone is convinced that these jars are batteries. Skeptics point out that the jars seem to contain a lot of debris, and the copper is only neatly rolled up like you'd expect if it was meant to function as an electrode. Plus, there's no evidence of corrosion on the metals, which you'd expect if a current was flowing through them. For their part, the archaeologists argued that the contents of the jars are consistent with them being used as batteries. They also suggested that the rolled up copper might have been damaged after it was buried, and that corrosion would have required direct contact with the acid, which the copper doesn't appear to have had. While debate continues about whether the Baghdad Battery really was a battery, there's no doubt that there were many things that ancient humans didn't know. How to preserve human remains, how to get rid of hiccups, and perhaps most importantly, how to avoid accidentally destroying the world. Learn more about what we don't know in this episode, or watch this video instead. There are plenty of other examples of seemingly advanced technology found in ancient ruins, such as the Antikythera mechanism, but the Baghdad Battery is the earliest candidate for advanced technology we know of. Not only does it predate the other examples, but it was found in such good condition that its creators may have only been a few steps ahead of us. So what might have happened if the folks living in the Parthian Empire had electricity? Well, to find out, we turn to the social media masses and asked you guys what you think ancient humans would invent first with their newfangled electricity. And your answers really ran the gamut from practical to absurd. A lot of people thought that lighting would have been the first priority, and we could have seen electric candles or lanterns well before the rest of the modern world. Given that oil lamps were common in the Middle East at the time, there's a good chance that some clever engineer could have combined the two. Some of you were pretty sure that they would have gone straight for the party trick of electrifying everything. With enough acidic liquids on hand, you could probably zap unsuspecting friends and family members with a little homemade taser. After that, they'd move on to bigger game, like livestock, if they had developed the ability to create larger voltages and currents. Although, if they stuck to smaller devices, they could have had a booming business electroplating jewelry. And hey, they might have been able to spread the wealth a bit more with gold plating. But whatever they did, it would have put a very literal spin on the phrase going viral. Then there were the weirder answers. You guys seemed pretty sure that ancient humans would have zapped themselves with their own self-powered somehow creating a dystopian future where death itself was optional. One person said they would figure out how to bring people back from the dead and then use the resulting zombie army to take over the world. Look, we appreciate that you weren't afraid to go bold with your answer, but please keep the speculation a little more grounded in reality next time. We didn't think anyone would say that ancient humans would come up with an indestructible toaster, but here we are. Someone else said that they'd immediately invent forklifts, which is funny because most of the comments about forklifts were from people who didn't think they'd invent anything at all. They pointed out that electricity wouldn't do you much good if you could unharness the energy efficiently. No matter what ancient civilizations came up with, it would have taken centuries to spread. Still, others said that the Baghdad Battery isn't nearly advanced enough to power any of these devices. It's hard to say if ancient humans would have come up with any of this stuff, but it's fun to imagine how things could have turned out differently. If you want to learn about another possible alternate history, check out our episode on the brain domination. While it seems like life on Earth has always been full of conflict, there was a 200-year period in the 17th century when European powers essentially agreed to stay out of each other. Historians call it the Great Peace, and they're still trying to figure out why it lasted so long. Thanks for watching this episode. We'd like to thank you for being a part of our community.